Hey folks, and welcome back to another episode of the Sarcast. And today I'm going to be doing a rundown on the new tanking role that comes with the new Monk class in Mists of Pandaria. So today I'm on the beta servers, and I will give you a quick rundown on some of the abilities and mechanics of the new Brewmaster. So, a bit of background first on the current tank classes in the game. There are currently four. That is the Warrior, the Paladin, the Death Knight and the Druid. And the way these different tanks mitigate their damage is different for each class. Warriors are all about blocking damage and mitigating as much upfront damage as possible. They can critically block, which basically doubles the amount they block for, which makes them excellent ad tanks, as well as makes them a fairly good soloing class as well, which means they basically take very little damage when they soloing quests, stuff like that there. But most of their damage is actually just blocked straight up front. Paladins work slightly similar in their shield tank as well, but they will have other mitigation ongoing as well, such as Divine Protection, Divine Shield, and they'll have their self heals as well, such as Word of Glory and some small heals off Seal of Insight. However, they can't critically block, which basically means they can only block 30% of the damage, as it is on live anyway. The other two classes then are the Druid. The Druid basically stacks armour and health and dodges as much attacks as possible. Any attacks they don't dodge is able to be soaked up essentially by their high health pools and their high armour levels. And then of course the Death Knights, which are the more recent addition to the game that came in Wrath. They don't mitigate damage as such. What they do is basically have massive amounts of self-healing through Death Strike, which basically means they can, as you've probably seen through the likes of Mune her videos, basically able to solo old raid content fairly easily, as they're able to self-heal for up to, I think it's 40% or 60% of the last 5 seconds incoming damage, which if you string together a couple of death strikes is pretty much full health. They of course have the Lichborn Death Coil self-heal as well, which is fairly hefty self-heals ongoing there too. So Brewmasters sort of fall halfway in between Death Knight and Warrior. Now the Brewmaster isn't a shield tanking class, so how are they like a warrior? Well, the way the Brewmaster works essentially is they will take 100% of the damage basically if you do nothing. So if you get hit for 100,000 hit points, you will take over time 100% of that damage. However, what the main mitigating ability for the Brewmaster is a thing called Stagger. Stagger basically means that 50% of the damage gets applied straight up front. So you will take 50k of that 100k damage straight up front. The other 50k then gets applied as a dot to the player. That will tick over a certain amount of time until the other 50k then eventually ticks out. What the Monk or the Brewmaster class has to remove that dot then is an ability called Purifying Brew. It's an ability that costs 1 chi, and chi is the holy power like resource that monks use. So pretty much like a paladin has holy power, monks have chi to use as a secondary resource system. The monk's main chi generating ability is Jab, which is a medium hitting quick attack. So basically you can spam Jab and alternate Jab and Purifying Brew basically to mitigate completely 50% of any damage incoming, which when you consider that shield tanks only block for 30% of damage, whereas then critically block for 60% of the incoming damage, it's a fairly powerful mechanic. Which means that Brewmasters are at least on a par anyway with the other tanks as far as survivability goes. Now the other abilities that the Brewmaster has are a lot of self-heals, which is why it's like a Death Knight. They have things called healing spheres, These things will drop on the ground, and only the monk can see them. When they run through them, it heals them basically for a set amount of health. There are passive abilities that will let you generate these healing spheres 1% of the time. So when you're dealing damage and you're tanking a raid boss, 1% of the time you will have a healing sphere plop up on the ground beside you, and running through it will heal you for about 9,000 health at level 85. So the abilities that the Brewmaster has, there are two sets as usual. One is the offensive abilities and the other is the defensive abilities. The first attack you'll use, which is going to be your main chi generator, is a thing called Jab. It's a weapon attack that generates 1 chi. As I said earlier, the chi system is the holy power like mechanic that monks have, and it's basically used to power various abilities in the toolset. So Jab is going to be your main chi generator. It's short, no cooldown, apart from the GCD it costs, and will basically be where most of your chi comes from throughout the course of a fight. The second one then is Tiger Palm, which is an unarmed attack. Attacks with the palm of your hand and deals damage. Grants you Tiger Power, which causes your attack to ignore 5% of your enemy's armor for 20 seconds. And that stacks up to 3 times. So essentially, if you keep up your Tiger Palm buff, you're going to be ignoring essentially 15% of the enemy's armor, which will increase your damage and therefore your threat as well. The next ability then is Blackout Kick, which essentially means that you're going to basically kick whatever it is in the face, but also causes you to gain shuffle, as the tooltip says there. Increases your parry chance by 30%, and your stagger amount by an additional 20% for 6 seconds. So if you keep that up, your parry chance is going to shoot up by 30%, and the amount of damage that you're mitigating straight up front will be increased by an additional 20%. So you're going to be weaving Jab, Tiger Palm, and Blackout Kick in amongst each other. Basically keep up your Tiger Power buff, which lasts for 20 seconds, and your Stagger and Shuffle, which lasts for 6 seconds. So those 3 will probably be your main attacks throughout a fight. Right, bit of a server issue there, so on with the abilities. The next one then is Breath of Fire. It's a bit like the Mage Dragonfire breath attack. It doesn't require targets, so I can show you it here where I'm standing. It costs 2 chi, and if Dizzying Haze is on the target, it'll also burn the target for an additional amount of damage over 8 seconds. So this is what it looks like. So, like I said, pretty much like the Mage Fire Breath attack. The next one then is Chi Burst, which summons a torrent of Chi to the target, deals damage to all enemies and healing to all allies in its path, and will also heal the player as well. So while casting Chi Burst, you will also continue to dodge and parry, and it costs 2 Chi as well. Spinning Crane Kick, it is an AoE Bladestorm like effect, which I can show you here as well, and has a nice whirlwind style jade green animation effect there. And as you can see, it generates 1 chi every time it's used, and chi does not degrade or deteriorate out of combat. So if you work up 5 chi before a fight, even if you have to wait 20 minutes on somebody actually coming back online, you will still have the 20 chi, or the 5 chi. If you take the talent, otherwise you're going to have 4. The next attack then is Spearhand Strike, which basically is your interrupt. If they're facing you when Spearhand Strike is cast, they're also silenced out of all schools of magic for 5 seconds, which makes it useful for PvP as well. The next thing is Charging Oxwave, which is one of the talents that comes with the monk class. So basically any spec can take this. Essentially what this is a ox basically gets summoned and rushes forward and stuns any enemy within its path for 3 seconds. And again, its one doesn't require a target as such, so here it goes. And there's a 1 minute cooldown on that, and of course no resource cost either. The next one then is paralysis, which is your CC. Basically causes the target's muscles to contract, incapacitating them for 30 seconds. And if done like a rogue sap and done from behind, well, sap doesn't need to be done from behind, but if it's done from behind, the duration is doubled, which means it can last for up to a minute. The next attack then is Crackling Jade Lightning, and that basically shades Jade Lightning at the target, causing nature damage over 5.5 seconds. And will also have a 15% chance to generate up 1 chi as well. But if you get attacked within melee range while your target is victim to Jade Lightning, they also then get knocked back a short distance, but that has an 8-second cooldown on it. The next ability is one of the more interesting mechanics that the Brewmaster has. It is a thing called Touch of Death, and it costs 3 chi and has a 1.5 minute cooldown. Essentially what this thing does is, if as the tooltip says, you exploit the enemy target's weakest point, instantly killing them. And it's only usable on NPC mobs. It's only usable on non-player targets who have equal or less health than you. That basically means it can't be used in PvP. It's useful in that it will polish off a raid boss fairly quickly, or it will instantly kill any mob with lower health than you. So as a tank class, you'll have the highest health levels in the game. Tanks at the end of Cataclysm, in the Madness of Deathwing, certainly had 250,000 health points, and this will essentially kill anything once every 1.5 minutes with less health than you, which is a pretty interesting ability. You can see that getting abused quite often. Next one then is Grapple Weapon, which is another interesting one. You fire off a rope spear, which grapples the target's weapons and shield, returning them to you for 10 seconds. If you steal a better main hand weapon, your damage or healing will be increased by 5%, or damage taken reduced by 5%. Seems a bit like a PvP ability to me. Although there probably will be mobs in the Pandaria raids that will have shields, but I can't see the mobs having better main hand weapons really, which is a bit bizarre. So that's the majority of the offensive abilities. There are a couple of others, like the usual Provoke, which is the Brewmaster taunt. Brewmasters also have it as spell. I know paladins have that as well, but it's useful at times, and it only costs 20 energy. But as with all the other dispels in the game come Pandaria, there is now an 8-second cooldown, which is going to be a bit worrying for the healers, especially when you have fights with a lot of debuffs going on. If you were classified as the main dispeller in a raid fight, not going to happen anymore, I'm afraid. So the defensive abilities, the main one that the Brewmaster is going to be using is this one, Guard. Guards against any future attacks and absorbs a set amount of damage for 30 seconds. And whilst that is active, like so, any heals you apply to yourself are increased by 30% as well. Now, this thing will cost 2 chi and it has a 30-second cooldown, but it lasts for 30 seconds, so in theory you could have it up indefinitely. Just get back some chi here. Not too sure why that will absorb 30k and then break, much like a mage's frost barrier, or will mitigate 30k of any attacks for 30 seconds, which would seem more sensible. But the next one then is, as I mentioned earlier, Purifying Brew, and this is the ability that will remove the dot from the stagger mechanic. And thanks to the Monk passive ability, Healing Elixirs, anytime you take a drink from a brew or a tea, you will also get healed for 10% of your maximum health, but there is a 15-second cooldown on that healing ability. So the next one then is Expel Harm, and that will instantly heal you and cause 100% of the amount healed to instantly be dealt to a nearby target as damage within 10 yards. So it's a small heal and small attack, but it could come in useful, I suppose. Costs 40 energy, which isn't too much. And there's no chi cost to that. The next one then is Dizzying Haze. Now this is one that will get applied one of two ways, either directly through Dizzying Haze itself, or there is another mechanic called Keg Smash. Essentially what Dizzying Haze does is it reduces the movement speed of your target by 50% and causes enemies to have a 3% chance to misfire attacks, which will actually attack themselves instead for a set amount of damage. Keg Smash as well will induce weakened blows, which demoralizes the target, reducing their physical damage dealt by 10% for 30 seconds, which is similar to the debuff placed when a paladin uses their judgment ability. So Dizzying Haze will get applied one of two ways, either through Keg Smash or directly through the ability itself. Most of the time we're probably going to apply it through Keg Smash. The next ability then is Elusive Brew, which increases your chance to dodge by 10% for 8 seconds, which isn't a huge amount, especially as there's a 45-second cooldown. Will essentially mean your dodge chance will get increased by 10%. It's okay. Not great, but okay. Next one then is a 3-minute cooldown, Fortifying Brew. Turns your skin to stone, increasing your health by 20%, your stagger amount by an additional 20%, and reduces damage taken by 20%, and lasts for 20 seconds. Pretty decent cooldown actually. Will essentially mean that you will be mitigating quite a lot of incoming damage, especially if you're keeping up your stagger buff, which already increases your stagger amount by 50%, or up to 50%. This will increase it by an additional 20%, which will basically mitigate 70% of your incoming damage, reduce damage taken by 20%, and increases your health pool by 20% as well. So a fairly interesting cooldown. This is just a straightforward buff, pretty much like King's. Increases strength, or Market Wild increases strength, agility, and intellect by 5%. So will do nothing for a monk really, except increase their strength by and their agility by 5%, which isn't great, but. The next one then is Zen Meditation, which reduces all damage by 99% and redirects to you all harmful spells cast against party and raid members within 30 yards. That lasts for 8 seconds. This is only going to be useful when there is a lot of magic damage going on. So if you think of the likes of Chimeron with his big attack that he used to do, can't remember the name of it now, but this will basically reduce all that for everybody in the raid within 30 yards, which is extremely useful. Would also come in handy on the Madness of Deathwing fight for the 4th platform's Elementium Bolt, which would be fairly OP. The next one then is going to be one of your main abilities that are going to be using quite often, the Black Ox statue. This is a summonable statue, which I will summon here. Now that thing can be basically placed anywhere. What this does is that every time the monk deals 125k damage, the statue will cast Guard on an injured party or raid member within 40 yards and will absorb 12k damage lasting 30 seconds for them. Doesn't get applied to the monk, but it will help out with raid damage for your most injured raid members. This thing has a health pool of about 88k. Whether or not that can actually be reduced, I don't know, but it would make sense if it wasn't, because otherwise it won't last very long in the middle of won't last very long rather in the middle of a raid fight. You can also use this in conjunction with provoke, which is fairly interesting. What it actually does is an AoE taunt. So if you target your statue and hit provoke, you will basically taunt all enemies within 8 yards of your statue. Now that's interesting because the other tank classes in the game are all having their AoE taunts removed. I play a paladin tank as main, and righteous defense, which is the AoE taunt that a paladin uses, will be getting removed in Pandaria. So the other tanks are getting their AoE taunts removed, whereas the new tank class to the game gets one. It's a bit weird. It's supposed to make it appeal to more players, I suppose. The next one then is Avert Harm, which requires this statue, which is why I'm skipping over one there. Reduces the damage taken by all nearby friendly targets within 10 yards by 50% and causes half of that remaining damage they take to be redirected to you. And that lasts for 15 seconds. Avert Harm will be cancelled if you get to 10% or lower health, which if you're a main tank, scary. The one I skipped over there was Disable. It's basically a snare and a slow. Disables the target's movement, reducing their movement speed by 50%. The duration of the disable will be refreshed if the target remains within 10 yards of the monk. So if you are kiting a mob, if it stays within 10 yards of you, it's going to stay at 50% movement speed. Using disable again on a target will cause them to be rooted for 8 seconds instead. So it's going to be useful in PvP as well, I reckon. The last one then is Healing Sphere, and these are the spheres I talked about earlier on. There's big ones and there's small ones. The small ones will pop up when you do damage to a target, and you have a 1% chance to get one of those. These, however, are summonable, and you can have up to 3 at any one time. And it costs 60 energy to cast it. If you try to cast it again, it gets rid of the first one that you cast. So it says if you walk through those, it will heal you at 85 anyway for 12k damage. Allies as well will be able to see these particular ones, and if they walk through them they'll get healed as well. Like I said, you can have a maximum of 3 up at a time, so it'll be useful to have those down whenever you know an ability is about to go off and a group of players are about to get hit. You can, I'm assuming, stack them one on the other. Yep, you can. So that is the main defensive abilities that the Brewmaster has. They also have a raise available as well, resuscitate, but cannot be used in combat, unfortunately. So I will see you down at the training dummies. We will give these a quick run through.